Hey friends, if you've been struggling to get your mixes to be as loud as other artists and you don't understand how it is that they are achieving these loudness levels while still having a clean, dynamic mix, then this video is for you. What I'm going to show you in this video is a step-by-step workflow to achieving professional loudness levels using only native Ableton devices. So let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to use all Ableton devices to achieve the loudness level that we're targeting, but I am going to use one plugin that is just going to be showing us how loud the mix is. And this plugin is actually free. Anyone can download it. And if you don't have a loudness meter already, I highly recommend Youlean Loudness Meter 2, because first of all, it's free, and second of all, it's got really great data. So I'm going to go ahead and play this down-tempo kind of side-dub idea. And the loudness target that I'm going to be going for is -8 LUFS. So let's go ahead and take a listen to this. So we're getting around -17 LUFS. That is our loudness units at full scale number that we're getting. Now, commonly EDM music will range anywhere from, -3 all the way up to about -10. And this is a common thing. This specific song, this would be kind of like the verse of it. So this is kind of a quieter part. So I think a reasonable loudness target for this part right here would be like -8. Okay, so that's going to be our loudness target. I think it's really important to set a loudness target, and one way that you can set your own loudness target is to look up the genre that you create music in, and then kind of just to see the average levels. And then, of course, each song is going to have different elements that's going to play into this whole thing, but for now, let's just assume -8 is our target. Now, let's observe the problem. So what I've got here is a limiter on Ableton Live, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the input gain until I achieve my -8 LUFS target. Okay, so as you can see, I can get up to around -8 short term by putting in about 14 dB of gain here. Now, of course, this sounds terrible, right? There's pumping, there's breathing, there's distortion, there's the lack of dynamics. It just sounds bad. Now, an absolute novice could achieve any loudness target that they want, but of course, the trade-off is going to be distortion, pumping, and breathing. But it doesn't have to be that way. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a bunch of different tactics here in Ableton Live to solve this. Now, maybe the first thing you're wondering is, why am I using a limiter first? Well, what's nice about using a limiter first in this strategy is that the limiter can help us reveal the actual problems. What are the reasons why we're getting all this distortion, this pumping and breathing when we try to achieve our loudness target? It can actually be our detective to help us look at, over time, what is causing the limiter to have to work so hard. Because really, that's what is causing the distortion, this limiter working hard, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the drums, okay? And so commonly, of course, drums are going to be the thing that really challenges a limiter, because drums are commonly what? They're the loudest instrument in your mix, okay? So let's go ahead and look at just the drums at this loudness level, at this input gain setting. Let's look at what's happening to the limiter. So I'm going to reset the gain reduction here, and let's go ahead and take a look. Huge -10 dB reduction on our gain reduction here in order to achieve this loudness, right? So, of course, that's not going to work. So the first thing I want you to understand is we're going to tab over to Session View here, and I want you to look at the VU meters. What we're seeing is two different colors here on this drum group. This is comprising of all my drums. We can see that there are two colors on the meter. There's a bright green, and this represents RMS, or root mean square, which is akin to how we hear, and then we can see this big spike happening with these darker colors in the background. Take a look. Essentially, the idea here is that the limiter has to deal with peak level, but our ears, what we hear, is more akin to the RMS level, which is the bright green. So when you are making a bunch of peak signal, the limiter has to deal with that peak signal. Let's go ahead and just solo the snare out, okay? So we're just going to look at the snare by itself and look at the limiter. So there's that -10 gain reduction there. But if you look at the actual meter of the snare, we can see that the peak signal is going way up higher than the RMS. So we can see that the snare drum is reaching a peak level of -2 dB, but we can see that there's a big spike on the peak signal versus the RMS. So I'm going to go into the snare track, and basically what we need to do is we need to reduce the peak signal versus the RMS signal, okay? And we can do this transparently using a clipper, okay? So now, before you go out and download a clipper, Ableton Live has inside of it, built into the software itself, really good clippers. And that's using the Saturator device. So let's go ahead and drag a Saturator in here. Now, we can use Saturator as an effective clipper, but we have to do a couple things. First of all, we need to right-click on the title bar and turn off high quality. And I'll show you why I've turned off high quality here in just a moment. But first of all, let's take a look at Saturator's options. So we have analog clip and digital clip. These are both effective clipping modes inside of Saturator. So let's start with digital clip here, because digital clip can tend to be the cleanest with certain types of sounds. So the whole idea here is we need to increase the drive and decrease the output by the same amount. So let's go ahead and add 10 dB maybe on the input and take 10 dB out. This is a good place to start. So now, before the Saturator, let's take a look yet again. We can see that we're hitting around -20 on the RMS, but again, we're hitting -2 on the peak signal. So when I turn the Saturator on and reset the meter, take a look now. Bam. Now we can see that the RMS has not changed. We're still hitting around -20 right there, but now we're hitting -10 as a peak signal. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my main and I'm going to turn off my limiter because I really want you to listen here, and I want you to listen to the fact that this sounds exactly the same whether the Saturator is on or off. So without it, with it, right? But with the Saturator off, okay, and the limiter on, I'm going to reset this meter. Take a look. Huge -10 gain reduction on the limiter. But if I go back to my snare track and I turn on my Saturator, now look at the limiter. -2.11. So this is the essential thing to understand. I've reduced the peak signal versus the RMS, and I've done it in a way where I can't even hear the difference, right? I can't even hear it. So, I mean, we might even be able to get away with a little bit more here. But before I do that, I want to validate the whole reason I turned off high quality. So with high quality off, we get a -10 result. If I right-click on here and choose high quality, now check it out. We get less of a benefit, okay? Because Saturator is now oversampling, it's less effective at clipping, okay? That doesn't mean that oversampling is bad to use. It's just in this context, using a Saturator as a clipper, it's best to leave high quality off. So something we can do to save some time here is we can right-click and choose Group. And now we can go to our macros and choose Map, and we can map the drive and the output to the same knob. Now, if I go up here and I choose that the minimum of the drive is 0, and then I invert the minimum maximum of the output, what'll happen is that when I turn this knob up, it'll increase the gain whilst decreasing the output at the same exact amount. Check this out. See, so as I go up, we can see that it's reducing and adding at the same amount. So this is a really nice little preset you can save for yourself. We'll call this, we'll just call it Clipper. So now I have a clipper. And what I can do is I can just use this while listening to my snare to achieve the right input-output level. Now you can see that once I've gotten up to 24, we're starting to lose characteristics of the snare drum. It's starting to sound smushed, right? That's too much, right? That's not going to work. So I'm going to go back until I hear all the characteristics of the snare drum that I want, right? Awesome. So you can see that you can really get away with a lot here. And so now, we've got like a... And so that's amazing. -13. So now when I go over to my limiter, bam, I'm not even challenging the limiter at all. And I can't even hear the difference whether this is on or off. Hey, so a quick word from our sponsor, who is me. While YouTube is a great place to get free tutorials and information on music production, the lack of lesson structure, continuity, accountability, and community makes it really hard to piece it all together. My super high-rated Ableton online courses cover the 4 main directions that you can go with Ableton: songwriting, mixing, sound design, and live performance. They provide you with an optimized chronological lesson structure to ensure that you learn rapidly, but you also retain the information. When you enroll, you also get access to my private Discord server where you can get near real-time answers to your Ableton questions from me and other members of the community. Also, due to Ableton recognizing Seed to Stage as a legit source of education, we can pass off 30% savings on Ableton software and upgrades to our students. I'm confident that these are the very best educational offerings for Ableton Live, to the degree that I offer a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not feeling it. You can see from the ratings that these courses are the real deal. I really hope you'll consider joining our community. We're having a lot of fun in our Discord. If you want to learn more about it, the link is down in the description. Okay, let's get back to the video. So let's move on to the kick drum. And so the cool thing now is I can just simply copy this clipper and I can put it on the kick. So let's go ahead and listen to the kick without the clipper. Again, we can see that while we have a lot more RMS, there's still a lot of peak signal above our RMS here. And so if I turn on my clipper, okay, a lot of distortion. You hear that distortion there? So now we have to tailor this for the kick drum. So I'm going to remove a bunch of gain. Let's go ahead and maybe do like 3 dB in and 3 dB out. So now with the clipper, -6. Without the clipper, -4. So we'll try a little bit more. I can get away with 4. Let's try 5. I can get away with 5. Let's try 6. So as you can hear, 6 is where we start to get some distortion. So backing it back off to about 5. Cool. So again, I can use this clipper everywhere. Another place I could use this clipper is on the drums itself. So I'm going to paste this on the drum group now, and I'm going to clip this even further. Great, so about 5 in, 5 out, it sounds like that's what we can get away with, right? Now real quick on kick 2, I'm gonna put the same thing on here. Now the next thing to understand about loudness and crest factor is that if you're looking at a waveform and there are long peaks, as in the transient of each drum is long, it's gonna be harder to clip that signal transparently, okay? So the reason that clipping works is because it happens so fast. You can't actually hear the distortion. There is distortion being added to these sounds, but it's so fast that you can't hear it. But in the case of the kick drum, the sound of it is lasting so long that I can actually hear some distortion in there, right? So what we need to do is we need to shape the transients to be faster of the kick drum. And so the way that we can do that is using, of course, a compressor. So I'll use a glue compressor here, and I'm gonna put it before my clipper. So what we can do is we can turn the attack up of the compressor. Let's turn it up to like 10 milliseconds. And we'll turn the release down maybe like 2 or 4 or something. And what this is going to allow us to do is that as we dig into the signal, it's going to shave off the edges of the transients in a logarithmic fashion and make them not only sound better, but also prepare the signal better for the clipper. So let's take a listen. Great. So now we've got the threshold down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add some makeup gain to make it so that with the compressor on or off, it sounds about the same level. Okay, cool. So that sounds about the same level. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to A-B the compressor on or off, and I want you to listen specifically to the main kick drum and listen to how long it's lasting. So without it, with it. Right? So we can actually emphasize this by going even harder. So without it, with it. So now that I've got this set up, I might be able to feed a little bit more into my clipper. Let's take a listen. Cool, so yeah, I can get away with now 6.5 dB of input-output on the clipper because I've prepared my transients better for the clipping. Awesome, so looking at our limiter now, we can see that before we were getting a -10 dB reduction on our limiter, and now we're just getting a -4. So we've gotten a lot better, right? And it sounds great, it sounds nice and clean. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to unsolo the drums, and now we're going to use the limiter to help us identify what might be making it so hard to get this track up to our loudness target. So again, with that pumping and breathing, that distortion. I may have gotten my drums dialed in, but of course, when the drums are playing with everything else, we're still challenging this limiter. So the next thing to understand, and those of you that have been mixing a long time, listening to this, you might be like, okay, there's so much low end. And yes, that's the next issue I want to talk about. There are so many instruments that are competing for sub space, okay? So really, if you want to get a loud mix, there shouldn't be more than one instrument making low end at the same time, okay? And let me show you how we can figure this out. So the first thing is we have two different basses here. Let's go ahead and go back to arrangement view and let's take a look. So I have this main bass right here, right? And then I have this bass. Now, even though these basses aren't playing at the same time, they are overlapping with each other, okay? And so because this second bass has an overlap with the first bass, they are going to be conflicting and therefore making a lot of energy in the low ranges, and that's going to what? That's going to challenge my limiter, okay? Taking a look at the limiter, even though if I have this bass soloed, it's not even touching the limiter. All right? And so basically I need to make a decision here. I actually don't think that this bass right here needs to have sub even in it, right? Because I really want this to be the sub. I want this to be the sub, and I want this to be what a lot of music producers will refer to as a mid bass, okay? So looking at this bass, let's go ahead and grab ourselves an EQ. So when I play this bass here, we can see there's just so much low end here, right? So what I can do is I can actually just choose a low cut, and I can pull this low cut up a little bit and maybe tailor this more toward the tone of this bass. Because I like the tone of this bass. It's a low instrument, but I don't like how it's conflicting, of course, with the other bass. Now, another thing is that I don't really see a reason for it to be so wide. So I'm going to grab a utility, and I'm going to turn the width down a bit. And another thing I can do is I can turn on bass mono, and what this will do is that everything under a certain frequency will be mono. So I'm actually going to pull this up until maybe like 200 or 250, and that will also, this material right here, will be forced into the mid channel, which will challenge my limiter less. So now, when I play both of these basses together and look at the limiter, awesome. Right? So now, with all the mix playing, let's look at the limiter. See, now we're getting to the point where I can listen to this limiter. It's still really bad, right? It's still very, very pumping and breathing, but there's less distortion now, right? There's less distortion happening because now I'm not challenging that limiter the whole time with low end, okay? Let's go ahead and listen, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually group these two devices together, and I'm going to map a key. Let's just use the Q key for now. I'm going to map the Q key to this and AB this, and let's look at the limiter. So without the processing on this bass 2, watch the limiter. Now with the processing on this bass 2, watch the limiter. See, what we're looking at is we're looking at activity here on this gain reduction. If there's a lot of activity, that means that the limiter has to be active, right? It has to constantly be pushing this down, and so that's going to cause that pumping, breathing kind of sound, right? So again, without it, with it. So we can see there's less activity there, okay? Awesome. So again, let's use our detective limiter to figure out when there are other conflicts or when we're challenging that limiter. Okay, so we can see huge gain reductions happening about right here in the composition. Let's watch again. Woo! Where is that happening? So something I want to point your attention to is this guy right here. I think that this is what's happening. Let's go ahead and solo this tonal percussion track and watch the limiter. Resetting my gain reduction. Okay. -9. What is this even? What is this sound even? It's just a sound effect, right? I don't need the sub in there. So first of all, let's grab an EQ. So grabbing an EQ and putting it on this tonal bass, let's go ahead and reduce this sub because I don't even need it on this sound. Okay, so to my ears, that's kind of the gist of the sound. And now let's look at the limiter. Okay, so we haven't reduced the gain that much, but what we have reduced is something else. So let's go back to session view and let's look at this tonal percussion 2 track. Without the EQ, let's take a look at the RMS and the peak. So we get a negative 24 RMS and we get a negative 5 peak. If I turn on my EQ though, take a look now. Okay, look at that, a negative 30 RMS. So while turning this EQ on and off doesn't challenge the limiter much differently, let's take a look. So right now it's, yeah, negative 8. And if I go back here and turn off my EQ, it's now negative 9. See, there's not a big change, but there is a big change somewhere else. And this is where being perceptive really matters. So if I turn my EQ back on, I'm reducing my RMS level versus my peak level. And so what does that mean? You're right. Now I can effectively clip this signal better, okay? Let's go ahead and grab our clipper. So I'm putting the clipper after the EQ, and let's go ahead and drive this. Right? So using this EQ has allowed me to clip this signal really, really effectively, right? So now check this out. If I turn the EQ off, though, ooh, listen to all that distortion, right? So I really want to drive this home. Using a clipper just by itself sometimes is not enough. Sometimes you need to use other processing like an EQ to get that sub out of there and get the RMS away from the peak so that you can clip it more effectively. So now with these two devices, I'm going to group them together and let's go ahead and use that same Q key, but this time I'm going to map it to these two devices. And now let's watch the limiter. So with it off, we get that huge negative 9. With it on, right? Super amazing. So let's go ahead and listen to the mix again and watch the limiter. Okay, so we're getting somewhere now. Things are starting to sound better. Now, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, hey, why haven't you reached for sidechaining yet? Well, that's the problem. A lot of people go to sidechaining first. When their limiter is getting challenged, they make the assumption that you need to do your sidechaining first. And honestly, I think it's better to look at other problems first, to look at your crest factor of various tracks and get that under control first and then go to sidechaining later, okay? So before we get to sidechaining, well, I'm going to do this really fast. On this tonal percussion, take a listen. Do you hear that bass in there? You probably didn't even know that this track had low end in it before, right? And so this is a clear indication that it's a good idea to use an EQ to get the bass out of here because I just don't need it. Take a look at this before I do this. See all that sub low end? I just don't need it. So I'm going to pull this up. And then, of course, I'm going to grab my clipper. Okay, so I've got some distortion in there. Let's try analog clip real quick. Hear how the character of the distortion is a little bit different with analog clip versus digital? Digital sounds a little bit more, for lack of a better term, crisp, right? Analog clip might be a better boat to use for this sound. But of course, I'm still adding too much drive, and so therefore I need to back this off a bit. So I can get away with about 7 dB in and 7 dB out. So now again, with everything else, so I know that some of you might be looking at this mix and thinking, he's using session view a lot. Well, the reason I'm using session view is because I can have my meters up really high here, and I can see if there are tracks that are making significant peak signal versus RMS, right? Awesome. So we can see that now my tracks are sort of under control. I don't have too much peak signal versus RMS. So now I can move on to sidechaining. Okay, so of course, right now we have a situation where the kick drum, right here, is hitting at the same time as my sub. And both the kick drum and the sub bass are making what? They're making sub signal. So of course, if I want to have a loud mix, I can't have really more than one instrument making low end at the same time. So, of course, the next thing I can do is I can just grab a classic compressor and I can put that on my sub bass. So you don't have to use a compressor in this situation. You could also, of course, use, a Duck Buddy or another sidechain solution. But again, I wanted to just use Ableton native devices, no Max for Live devices to accomplish this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up and choose external. And I'm going to choose my kick drum kick. I have two kicks, but this is the one that's making significant bass or low end. I'm going to click on this one, and now this is the source. So when I hit play, we can see that big spike right there. That's the kick drum coming in. If external switch is off, it's looking at the bass instead. So it's really important to turn this switch on when you are doing this work. So the next thing I want to do is turn my ratio all the way up because I want this to be absolute, and turn my attack all the way down, okay? Because I want this to dig in to the kick drum as soon as possible. So I'm going to pull my threshold down. So now we can see that big reduction right there, right? Now, the next thing that I want to do is that the compressor needs to be able to see the signal coming in before it happens, okay? And so the next thing I can do is I can go to my look ahead time and make it 1 millisecond. This will get the compressor out in front of the leading edge of the bass waveform, and this will allow for a really clean gain reduction. So let's go ahead and listen to this without the compressor. If you're wearing headphones or if you're listening to this with good speakers, you can hear that this sounds wumphy, right? It's just making a bunch of energy, and it's not very clean. It just sounds kind of smeared, right? With the compressor on, however, listen to how tight and clean that sounds. Now let's go ahead and look at why, because I think that a lot of tutorials will stop here and say, you did it, right? But a lot of folks don't understand why this sounds cleaner. Well, not only are we getting the bass out of the way of the kick drum when the kick drum hits, but the other thing that we're doing is we're challenging the limiter less. So take a look at the limiter now. Look at how fast that transient is. It goes wham, really quick, right? But when I turn this compressor off, let's look at the limiter again. See how much longer that's lasting? And look at our gain reduction. -6, right? So going back to this bass, turning the compressor on, resetting gain reduction, -4, and it's faster, right? Bam. So something else that's nice about doing the setup this way is that I can now copy this compressor and put it in other places. So because it's being fed the kick drum. And so another thing that I've noticed is that when the tonal percussion and the bass are playing at the same time, they're challenging the limiter. Let's take a look. Right? So what I can do is I can go to my tonal percussion and I can say, all right, I need to also put this sidechain compressor with the kick drum on there. Cool, so hopefully you're starting to understand how important these little moves are, right? So I could also put this on this bass too, just for the heck of it. And see, it's so easy. I can just copy and paste this everywhere, wherever I feel like there might be a conflict. Great, so now that I've addressed all of these problems at the track level, the next thing to understand is that there's processing you can do, of course, on the mix bus or the main channel or the master to achieve these loudness levels. So for those of you that have been mixing for a long time, you might be looking at my limiter and saying, hey man, you're hitting like -7, -6 gain reduction on your limiter, and it's not a good idea to hit a limiter any more than 2 or 3 dB. Now, okay, that might be true, but at the end of the day, what we're going for is not arbitrary numbers. What we're going for is we're going for good sound. That's what I want. At the end of the day, I want low distortion, I want dynamics, and I want a good sounding clean mix. So if that means hitting a limiter at only -1 or hitting a limiter at -10, as long as it sounds good, that's what matters, okay? So I still think that the limiter is fighting this mix too hard. I think that this gain reduction is causing the limiter to have a sonic signature. I want this limiter to be transparent. Let's just go ahead and set an arbitrary rule for now that the limiter isn't going to reduce gain more than about 3 dB, okay? So let's go ahead and grab ourselves a compressor. Let's maybe use another glue compressor. So again, we have shaped the transients on the drums, but we could also do this on the master or the main track. So again, I'm going to do that thing where I'm allowing a lot of attack through, and I'm clamping down on my release pretty quick. And basically what this is going to do is this is going to shorten the loud parts of my signal to be so short that I won't hear the limiter's effect on those transients. So let's go ahead and start to reduce our threshold. So of course, because the glue compressor is living on the master, the effect that it has over the mix is going to be absolute. It's going to be very apparent. So I need to dig into it less than I did on my drums. Awesome. So now I need to add some makeup gain to make up the difference. Great. So without the compressor, and with it. So with the compressor off, let's go ahead and check in on our loudness meter, and let's see where we're at now. So we're getting an LUFS meter reading of about -9. With the compressor on, however, you can see that we're actually getting a louder mix, right, by using this compressor, even though it actually doesn't sound louder. Why is that? The limiter is working less. What that means is that it's pushing the gain down less, which means that what? That we're getting a louder mix, right? Because the amount of time that the gain needs to stay down has been shortened because I'm using the compressor to, again, shorten the transients, all right? So there's still distortion, there's still pumping, there's still breathing. What can we do? Well, the next thing we can do is we can, of course, clip on the master. So let's go ahead and grab our clipper again. And you might be thinking, clipping the master, that's a terrible idea. Well, again, you can do this transparently. So let's go ahead and pull this back. And I'm going to slowly introduce clipping between the compressor and the limiter. So let's go ahead and listen to our mix with and without the clipper on. Now, this almost sounds completely transparent to me. There's still a little bit of distortion happening here and there, but it's very rare. Let's go ahead and switch over to analog clip and see if we get a better result. So without it, now, I think the analog clip actually sounds the best here. And it looks like we're achieving our little arbitrary goal that we set for ourselves, making the limiter not have to reduce the gain any more than about 3 dB. So analog clip definitely sounds better than digital clip in this specific context. But again, analog and digital clip, it's good to try both of them to see which one is going to be your boat for the specific sound or the mix that you're working with. Now, a quick check-in on our loudness meter, we can see that now we have achieved pretty much almost our loudness target, okay? But there's still a couple things that I think we can do better on this mix. And one of the things that I hear is that now that we've done all the side chaining on the kick drum is actually pretty loud. So the first thing is that, you know, I could probably get away with turning my kick drum down a dB or so. Let's go ahead and turn it down 1 dB. And then again, watch the limiter. Awesome, so we're really close to a clean mix here. We're really close to our loudness target. One more thing I want to point out is that even this lead here, this lead is actually, during this busy part, is challenging my limiter and I can hear it. Take a listen right here. Again, we don't want sounds making significant low end at the same time. And there's actually low end in this lead. Let's grab an EQ. Take a look. Look, the fundamental frequency of this instrument is right here, but whatever distortion or aliasing or processing that is on this pigments lead is actually creating low end. Does that mean that the pigments plugin is bad? No, this happens anywhere. Any instrument, any synthesizer can create significant low end without you knowing it. Okay, so it's a really good idea to rein this kind of stuff in so that, again, you're not experiencing low end buildup, okay? Now, to me, that sounds still like the same instrument. I'm not gaining anything by having sub in here. But something else I want to point out is that I really think that this kind of sounds muffled when I could carve the space for this instrument out in a different area. So let's go ahead and maybe add like 2K, and we'll bring out some of that, and we'll bring out some of its harmonics and take some of its original fundamental frequency out. Great. And now another thing that I think that this instrument could benefit from is just some classic compression, because it's kind of peaky, right? It's making a lot of peak signal. And you don't always have to distort a signal to control its peak versus its RMS. You can also simply just use a compressor. So let's go ahead and do that. So as you can see, I'm using this compressor just to focus on the peaks of the signal. I'll go ahead and turn the ratio up a little bit, and I'm going to turn the attack up because it sounds a little unnatural pushing those down so quickly. Cool, so that sounds a little bit more natural, and guess what I can do now? I can grab my clipper. Digital clip sounds great. The signal is controlled. Now let's go ahead and listen to the whole mix. Great, so that part doesn't sound as busy as it sounded before. Let's go ahead and turn those two devices off. Listen again. Now let's turn them back on. Right? Clean. Okay, so we've basically made it. You can see that we now have, because I've done that to the lead, we've now got a negative 7.7 LUFS on our short-term meter. Now, I want to leave you with a couple things. You might be thinking, okay, I really want my track to be competitively loud. I want it to be louder than even this. Well, utilize the same exact things that I've already showed you here. So I set my limiter, of course, at negative 3.27 right now. That's the most that this limiter is pushing down. But you can get away with adding more in here, okay? If you want a louder mix, limit harder, clip harder, okay? Start to introduce white noise into your sounds. There are ways to get mixes up to, dynamic mixes up to -4, -3. But at the end of the day, the most important thing, again, is not making the loudest mix. It's making the best possible sounding mix, okay? How good your track sounds is the #1 metric that your listeners are going to want, okay? It needs to sound good. It needs to sound clean. It needs to sound nice, okay? It needs to be pleasant to listen to, okay? So loudness is not everything. Loudness is just one aspect of a good mix. Now, you might be thinking, hey, you're obviously making EDM here. You should be targeting like -5. Well, look, this is a verse part, okay? There could be a part where there's a brighter synth or something that's taking up more space where I would actually be targeting maybe something a little bit louder. But at the end of the day, I think that this is the right loudness level for this specific part, okay? So awesome. I hope that you've learned a lot from this video. I hope that you can really take away a lot of the workflow that I've showed you here. Again, if you want to learn more about mixing from me, I offer really robust Ableton online courses. Definitely check them out down there in the description. If you like this kind of thing, like, comment, subscribe, and ring the little bell so you know when I make new videos. Much love, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.